Today I am in San Antonio, Texas, sitting in the suite here at the hotel that the Hine Company has. We're here for the American Association of Law Libraries annual meeting. I'm talking with Bill Beintema. I hope is that close enough?
Beintema.
Beintema, sorry Bill.
That's okay.
I always call you Bill at these meetings, but
Right.
today I had to mention both names, or between us we did, and we
Yes.
have Bill.
I'm not offended.
Okay. Well, for many years you were the director of the law library at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville.
Yes.
And sort of with that, by way of introduction, could we begin by talking about your life when you were young, perhaps, and today?
Okay. I was born on Long Island in New York and raised in a little town called West Sayville, which was a Dutch community founded in the late 1800s. And all the men from the Netherlands would end up doing sea work, like fishermen, clammers, and oystermen. And it's also the home of the Blue Point Oyster Company, if people remember the Blue Point oysters, which
I
were very
remember
famous.
hearing about Blue Point oysters.
Yes.
I didn't know there was a company behind them.
Yeah, it was owned by a friend of my parents,
Uh-huh.
so it was kind of fun to know that. So, and then I grew up there in 1962. I moved to Miami, Florida with my mother. My father died when I was 14. And my goal was to become either a stockbroker or an undertaker. My parents had friends that were two undertakers, and they drove matching yellow Cadillac convertibles. And so as a teenager, I was impressed by that and thought, that might be a good profession. Needless to say, it didn't happen. It was probably for the best. Stockbroker, I wouldn't have survived at all. So, and I got a job at the University of Tennessee Law School. University of Miami College of Law, or Law School.
Well,
At the
you
law
eventually went to Tennessee.
I eventually
You
went to
ahead of yourself
Tennessee,
there,
yes.
All right. So you're
So-
at the University of Miami.
University of Miami. And I decided, gee, I'd like to be a law librarian, and thought that would be a good occupation. So the then director, Mario Goderich, said, well, you need to go to law school. Okay. So I went to law school, finished that up, and he said, if you go to law school, I'll give you a job as the assistant director right out of school. Okay. Well, they hired somebody else. So
So all this so-called prestige of being the assistant director went somebody else.
Yeah.
But
So-
you're still in the field.
But
so
I'm
you
still
must
in the
have
field.
survived.
So I applied to Florida State. He said, get your master's in library science. So I applied to Florida State. And that was an interesting story too. Because I went up there for an interview. And they said, well, you know, you don't have very high grades from law school. And I didn't. You know, that was not my main goal, was to be a lawyer anyway. So I said, but
don't
I
think
just...
anybody had high grades in our era. You know,
No.
The C was sort of that was a good grade
Yes.
as far as the law school is
Yeah,
concerned.
right.
Yeah.
So they said, well, that's not a graduate level program. And I said, what? No, that's not a graduate level program. Okay. Well, they lowered their standards and let me in anyway. I was there for 2 quarters, and then I got a call to come back to Miami for the job, because the woman that they hired left on 2 weeks' notice. Went back to Miami and was the associate or assistant director for about 5 years. And then we had a new director, Dick Hutchins, who is a great guy. I considered him a mentor. He came from University of Iowa,
Yeah.
and we got along fine. And he said, you've got to finish that degree. Went back to Florida State.
Now Florida State is not exactly down the street from Miami.
No.
I mean, it's up in the north end.
It's in Tallahassee.
It's quite a distance.
And by that time I was married, and we had bought a condominium in
Uh-huh.
Miami. And we were fortunate enough to rent it for 6 months, just by chance, to the G.D. Searles Pharmaceutical Company. And so we didn't have to pay the mortgage or anything. We had enough money coming in to pay for it. Couldn't get jobs in Tallahassee. But when I got back there, I got a lot more respect from the professors because I was in the field already.
Oh.
So I ended up with an average, I think I had 2 B's and all the rest were A's in law school. Not law school.
Library school.
Library school, yes. And I...
Well, there a C grade would not be good. I mean, it was
That's
very
right.
different, and I can see why these graduate studies people were concerned by your law school grades. But
Yeah. And
none of us would have made it into library school.
That's
We
right.
really looked at that too hard.
that's right. And I had the last quarter I had a class with the dean.
Uh-huh.
Called The Medium is the Message. I forget what the name of the guy was. And he said, we're going to have a take-home final exam. Okay. The day exam, he hands it out. He says, oh, by the way, it's a closed book exam. I thought, well, that's weird. You know? So Jane and I packed up a picnic lunch, went to McKay Gardens, had lunch, and I wrote out the exam and got an A. So it was okay.
Well, it sounds like you behaved yourself, at least in terms of not having any open books.
That's true, I did. I didn't cheat.
Yeah.
Because I felt pretty important, pretty solid about that. I didn't want to do that.
Uh-huh.
So that was how I got into law librarianship. And I've really been happy.
Now, did Mario play a role sort of in helping to recruit you into the field, or
Yeah.
did you have
Well,
anybody
Mario,
play that role?
he was kind of an interesting director because he was a former judge in Cuba and
Oh.
lawyer.
He became a judge after that job, too.
He's still a
in
judge
Miami.
in
Yeah.
Miami.
Yeah.
He's getting old. But aren't we all?
Aren't we all?
Aren't we
Yeah.
all? So, but I've seen him a couple of times, you know.
Oh.
In fact, the first meeting I went to, double away from Miami, was in Chicago. And we had hotel rooms that were next to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And he decided that was not going to work. So he moved to another floor.
Oh.
I don't know why, but I have my suspicions. No, he was okay.
That was the hotel down by the Hancock Center. I'm trying
Drake.
to think. The Drake.
The
yeah.
Drake Hotel, yes.
I remember there, the elevators were so overwhelmed, you would often, in order to get an elevator to go down, you grab one going up and then rode it all the way.
Yeah.
And then you had a seat on the thing.
Right,
Place.
right. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So then, so I spent 6 years total as the assistant director.
Mm-hmm.
And then in '78, we moved to Oklahoma City
Mm-hmm.
and joined the law school there. Oklahoma City University, not the OU.
Mm-hmm.
So, that was an interesting experience too.
Mm-hmm.
I went to interview in Rochester, New York.
Okay, the EL meeting was in Rochester.
Yes.
I remember we had two hotels.
Two hotels
There was
across the
a
river.
river between and a bridge that you walked across.
And homeless people living in the lobbies of the hotels.
Yeah.
So that was an experience. Well, I had the dean and associate dean from OCU came there. His name was Ed Palmer, and he was a former associate dean at Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
He was very boisterous. He came in, swaggered in with wearing cowboy boots and a hat and everything.
Mhm.
He'd gone into the Oklahoma mode. And I thought, okay, I can't remember a word of that interview. I have no idea what I said. I don't have any idea what they asked me. But they offered me the job, and then they had me fly out, well, before they offered me the job.
Mm-hmm.
So I went out there. They picked me up at the airport, the professor and the dean. And the professor sits in the back seat of the car and said, I don't think you can fit between the stacks. Because in those days I weighed over almost 350
Yeah,
pounds.
and they also didn't have the Americans with disabilities
Right.
yet, and all the spacing that they had to have
Right.
between the stacks.
So, but they still offered me the job, and I ended up being good friends with most of the faculty there. They were a good group.
Uh-huh.
They were very laid back, not your typical law faculty.
Mm.
You could talk to them, joke with them, and enjoy yourself with them.
Yeah.
And that's the way I am. I don't like a lot of formal things.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it was interesting when I took my wife there the first time. We took a tour of the place again, so she'd see what it was like. And we got back to our room, and she said, "Oh, that place is off." I said, "Oh, it looks a lot better than when I went the first time." So, on my first day on the job, one of the toilets overflowed,
Uh-huh.
came down into the reference and reserve section. I thought that was not a very auspicious beginning. But the law school supported me, and they were trying to really do a good job. The university was always on the verge of bankruptcy, so we didn't have a lot of money,
Uh-huh.
but we needed a renovation. That was another ABA issue for them, and they were always threatening to take away our accreditation.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so we had moved the library twice, and I had my first ABA inspection after we moved into the renovated building. And the inspector on the team, the librarian, was Mary Oliver.
Okay.
From North
I remember.
Carolina.
Yeah.
She's a sweetheart.
Oh, yeah.
And I knew her from the days I was in CO.
Uh-huh.
So I knew her pretty well. And I didn't know how to do a inspection. I didn't.
You've never been through one before.
Never went through one in Miami. So she asked me these questions, and she said, "Well, what exactly have you done here?" And this is not good. I said, "Well, we moved the library twice. We moved the library." So then we started moving, and she started asking me the questions to get the information she needed.
Mm-hmm.
And she did not hurt us in our inspection at all. So I was so glad to know Mary Oliver. I thought she was a super lady. I liked her.
Yeah. She was of that vintage that Marion Gallagher and that whole group were part of. In fact, Marion Gallagher and Mary Oliver were very close friends, I remember, because I knew Marion, I worked for her for a long time.
I didn't know Marion at all.
Uh-huh.
I would say hello to her. Normally I was very shy when I started going to the meetings. And the first meeting that the first meeting was the Hollywood meeting. And I had just come back from Tallahassee the first time, and I worked exclusively on local arrangements.
You must have been part of it. I mean, that Hollywood, Florida is right by Miami, or
Yeah.
I don't know if the locals call it right by, but I do.
It's a little further north than I would have thought we would do it.
Couple hours. Maybe.
And Mario was the chair of local. In those days, it was really done locally.
Yeah.
And so we had a lot of fun with that. We got to try all the restaurants and we try the menus, and we had a revolving, the reception, the Rothman reception before the final banquet. That afternoon was bad weather, and it rained off and on, and we moved the reception 3 times
Okay.
before we finally settled on the inside. But it went very well.
Well, that was at the Diplomat, I
The
believe. There were about 3 or 4 buildings, and it was really very upscale, I thought.
It was.
Right by the ocean, and it was wonderful.
It was nice.
And one of the longtime book dealers, Fred Dennis, whom we all knew, of course,
Oh, yes.
he had a condo, literally, in that area.
Oh, I did not know that.
And I remember getting invited with a group to go up there to Fred's condo and actually see it, and it was pretty nice. I mean, we didn't know anything about that part of his life until at that point we learned about it. But,
He was quite a character.
oh yeah.
I have stories, but I won't tell them.
Well, he used to come visit me, and the first thing he'd do is check the stacks to see if there was anything he thought he could still sell me, and that was one agenda. The other one was to find out if any of his competitors had sold me any of the same things over the time since his previous visit.
That's right.
And one time he came roaring in, you'd think he was my boss, not just, Fred Dennis, the bookseller. And he was chewing me out because I'd bought a set of books from another company, now known as the Hine Company.
Uh-huh.
And they were competitors, and Fred was not pleased.
Now, did you know the connection then in those days?
I did, yes, I
Yeah.
knew that Bill Sr. Had been the nephew of Fred Dennis, and actually had worked for him for a while, but then had spun off to start his own business, but in the same business.
Yeah.
And
I know Fred came out to visit us in Oklahoma City,
uh-huh.
and I had just hired Kay Andrus
Mm.
from, he was out of Utah, from Provo. And it was his first professional job, and he was good.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I told him I was going to talk about him today.
All right.
He was afraid I was going to say some things that I shouldn't. But
Well, he can go look at this online and catch you
know.
if you do.
yeah, he said if I mentioned one thing, he would really give it to me. So anyway, he lasted about 9 months, and
Uh-huh.
he went on to SMU. And I have teased him about that for the whole time,
Mm-hmm.
and that was in '79. Until now, I still say he can't keep a job.
Mm.
He's been at Creighton since 1990,
Mm-hmm.
and he's doing a great job.
And you
He's
still
a good
tease him
librarian.
about moving around too
Yeah,
much, huh?
yeah.
Yeah. Sounds like a stay-at-home type person now.
Yeah, he is. He likes it there.
Yeah. That's
So
good.
I tell him it's time for him to retire. He's no, not yet. He's not ready.
Well, if it's not something he's ready for, let him
Why
keep
do it?
going.
Yeah.
You and I are retired, so we know there's some advantages.
Oh, yeah.
But not everybody is ready for it.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So
Well, before we sort of return to your career, we've talked about the Oklahoma City Law School. Can I ask you if you have any passions or pursuits or hobbies, things one gets to do in retirement?
yes, yes. My wife and I like to travel.
Uh-huh.
We started traveling in 1990 when her brother called and said, "Do you want to take a trip to see the Passion Play in Oberammergau?"
Mm.
And we had one weekend to decide,
Mm-hmm.
and we decided to do it. And that started. We went almost every year for 20 years. And we're still doing it. We just are a little slowed down right now. But we've been to many countries. We really like it. And I like to take photographs, and I do slideshows. I like to cook,
Mm-hmm.
somewhat of a gourmet, not as good as I used to be. But I cook dinners in churches. I've done that. We sponsor a travelogue group at the University of Tennessee Faculty Women's Club. That we've been sponsoring it for about 15 years.
Uh-huh.
And it's mainly for senior citizens. And when I say senior citizens, I mean senior citizens.
Not kids like yourself.
Not
and
kids
me,
like
huh?
me, no.
Yeah. Well, I have a brother-in-law, actually. My late wife's oldest sibling is 91.
Yeah.
And when I'm around Bob, I feel like a mere kid. It's
Oh,
wonderful. Yeah.
I'd like to say something about Ida and Erwin Cernsey.
Ah.
Jane and I first met them in 1973. That was the first meeting Jane went to in Seattle. And I was co-chair of CONAL. And he and Ida were at the banquet that we had at the Science Center, Pacific Science Center,
Okay.
which was a nice event.
Mhm.
Well, they took us under their wing. And they were so nice to us. We just had a great time.
Mhm.
We went to their home and visited them. They came to see us.
Yeah.
Just great story.
Was this when they were still in Philadelphia, or had they
No,
gone down to Georgia?
they were in Georgia. then,
Okay,
by
they
then.
left Temple, because
Yeah.
he'd been in Temple, I know, for a while, and then
Mm-hmm.
went to down to Georgia.
Well, if you remember Erwin, he was very staid,
Oh, yeah.
perfectly dressed, the tie, the vest usually.
Yeah.
Well, they came to visit us, and we took them down to Pigeon Forge to see Dick Dale and one of the singers from the Lawrence Welk show. They were Lawrence Welk fans.
Oh.
And we got front row seats.
Mm.
And I can't remember the name of the woman that sang, but she sang one song, and she came down off the stage and sat on Erwin's lap. And Erwin sat there with his face straight ahead, never saying a
You say he
word.
was the old school. This was not appropriate.
This was not for him. And Ida was just about cracking up. She was enjoying it so much. So, and we visited him for the last, well, just before he died, we visited for 3 years straight.
Uh-huh.
When Ida was in a nursing home. I think she's still living, but she's probably not in good shape.
Well, we have actually an interview with Erwin that one of the librarians recorded with him a few years before he died. We don't have it up on Hein Online, and it'll only be a transcript.
Yeah.
Frank Hodek is editing it right now. But it was actually video recorded.
Oh,
We've
really?
been looking, or they've been looking at the university to see if they could find that video.
Yeah.
because we would then put it up like the others that are in video format. But we're gonna have, he's gonna have his say.
Well, that's
And I understand from what I'm told is in that transcript, I've looked at parts of it, but he has a fairly conservative view of what law librarian should be. You know?
Oh, yes.
I don't think he would understand today's digital world.
No, no. But he, till the very end, he was still like that. He was looking for me to find some books for him. He had some gaps in his Georgia laws, and I was hunting for them. I never could find them.
Uh-huh.
But I did find some interesting books that I thought he would like, and he appreciated those.
No,
He was just a great guy. A lot of people thought he was kind of too straight-laced.
yeah.
It didn't
Well, I
bother me.
remember when he was president, I don't know, he was standing around, nobody was around by him, and I had come along and he started talking to me, and I was just, one of the young kids in the association in those days. I was really quite impressed that he was talking to me.
Yeah,
And he was an interesting guy.
yeah, that was the year he was president.
Yeah, he was the sitting president there.
Yeah, he was good.
Yeah,
A lot of the old timers were that way.
yeah.
They'd come out, they tried to encourage you. I was trying to stop that.
Yeah.
But I would really, that's what I've tried to do.
Mhm.
I have people that come up to me now that say, I remember you from thus and so,
Yeah.
I have no idea who they are. And it surprises me. And there's a lot of people I do know. I also don't remember faces.
Yeah.
We were at a SEAL meeting in Montgomery, Alabama. And there was a woman in the art museum where we had the opening reception.
Uh-huh.
I said to Jane, my wife, I said, she looks very familiar. I've got to find out who she is. So I went over there and I said, hi. I said, my name is Bill Beintema. I said, you look very familiar. Have I met you before? She says, I worked for you.
Oh.
She was a student assistant,
Oh, yeah.
but she had finished law school and was looking for a job.
Yeah,
But I was-
had that experience with
Lord.
former students too. There were so many of them, and I didn't directly even supervise them.
Right.
So I would pass the circulation desk and see them, but it wouldn't register always. You know, it was interesting. Last year, the annual meeting was in Seattle, and I live near Seattle now in retirement, but I hadn't gotten to a meeting in quite a few years for various reasons. And I did go last year, and I looked around, and the first shock was, gee, I don't know any of these folks. And they hadn't worked for me. It wasn't that, they were just newer than I had been.
Yeah.
And then I saw you across the way. I know Bill.
Yes, he's been around a long time.
And I was pleased, because that's somebody I could talk to that
Right,
we
right.
knew each other.
Yeah, and of course, I remember you from when you were an American.
Yeah, I was there
So
30
that was
years.
good, yeah.
Yeah.
So
But I've been retired now 11, and it's a ways.
I'm into year 4,
Yeah.
and we're totally enjoying it.
Well, that's wonderful. Why don't we sort of return to your career? We talked a little bit about your experiences at Oklahoma City Law School. You were there about, what, 6 years, as I recall.
Yeah.
And then you moved over to the University of Tennessee, directly, as I recall.
Right.
Nothing in between. Could you talk about, you were there quite a while and did a lot of things. Could you
26
talk
years.
a little bit about that experience and maybe tell us some of the things you accomplished in the job?
Okay. That was a fun time. We anticipated. I didn't tell you anything about my wife yet, and she's important in my life.
Ah,
So I hope we can go back to
well,
that.
she comes to these meetings
She
too.
has been to 39 meetings since
Wow.
we've been married. We've been married 41 years. So
Why don't we will talk about both, and you can pick the sequence. So if you want
Oh,
to discuss
wow.
your wife first and then the
Okay,
job.
well-
I mean, priorities being, I'd put the wife
my
first.
wife, of course, I do what I'm told. That's
So-
what we've all
sounds
been
like
taught.
when I'm driving around and I have this bossy companion in the car, and then I
Yes.
have to explain that's the GPS unit.
My wife hates GPS,
Oh.
but Jane is from New York State too.
Uh-huh.
She lived in upstate New York. I lived on Long Island.
Mhm.
We met in Miami. I went to Miami in '62. She moved down in 1970
Mhm.
with the name of a good friend of mine who invited her to our church.
Mm.
And the church is kind of interesting because the minister who started it, his father served my parents in a church on Long Island
Oh.
in the 30s.
Mhm.
So he was determined that I was going to get married. And so he would match me up with anybody who came in the church that was a warm female body. And most of them were duds, you know. But Jane came along.
Should I edit that part out, or?
No,
I'm
no.
teasing you.
No, Jane came along, and now she says to me, yeah, he hit the bottom of the barrel. I said, no, the cream rose to the top. So.
Well, she's a super person. I remember yesterday talking with her down here in the exhibit hall area.
She's a sweetheart.
She's a lot of fun to talk to.
And we do lots of things together. But she's a good person.
But she's one of the people who has regularly come with you to these
Yes.
meetings.
Yeah, and she got a nickname.
Uh-huh.
Cam Riley, who used to be the director at West Virginia.
Oh, I remember Cam, yeah.
Cam is good. She nicknamed her the long-suffering Jane for having to put up with me and coming to the meetings.
Uh-huh.
And Jane still uses that, the long-suffering Jane.
Well, you know, some of the spouses that come get very much involved, just like we are in some of this stuff. So, you know, this long-suffering business may only fly on one side of that. And I don't think it probably does either.
Not really.
Yeah.
But Jane has always enjoyed the meetings. We brought her sister to a couple of them, so that was good. But she has a good time, and we always make a vacation out of it. You know, we go somewhere. Last year we went to Vancouver for a week, and that was very nice.
Yeah.
So we'll do something every year. Not this year, but every other year.
Yeah. Well, there isn't anything exactly right next door to San Antonio.
No.
Although, you know, 5 hours you're in Houston, and probably 5 hours you're in Dallas in the other direction. And I don't know if you head the other direction how long it takes, but it's a bit.
Yeah.
Texas is big.
It is.
Yeah.
We've been down here several times. We have friends that are bird watchers,
Ah.
and they have a motorhome, and we would meet them. We've been to the South Texas coast many times. Back to Tennessee.
Now we'll get back to your real working
Yes.
world when you were working.
Went there on interview in '84, and they finally decided on me after probably 2 or 3 others. You know, I'm not a stellar librarian, but I will work.
Yeah,
I work for food.
You have a reputation for knowing your business.
Yes, so
and obviously ratified by the fact that you didn't get fired.
that's right. I've
You
never
were
been
there
fired.
a long time.
Never been fired. So
Yeah.
at times I thought I might, but it didn't happen. The dean, when I first went there, said, this was '84. He says, we're going to have a new building in 5 years. Promise. New building, 5 years. We didn't.
I promise you couldn't keep.
You couldn't keep it. The building was in bad shape. Well, we still have the building, but it's all renovated now.
Yeah.
But we had an ABA inspection. I knew a little bit about it then. And Ed Schroeder,
Okay.
Lord bless him. I love Ed. I worked for him years ago. And he came as the librarian inspector. And we have one steep set of stairs going from the lower reading room to the upper reading room. And he fell up those stairs because they were so steep.
Oh yeah.
You know, and he was embarrassed. I was embarrassed. But it's just what happens, you know. So, but I used to tease him about that too. So, and I listened to his review. I thought that was good.
Yeah. Well, we shot his out in his yard.
Yeah.
In Florida, it was a nice time of the year. It was March and down there.
Beautiful
And,
time.
It was a lot of fun.
So.
He has a nice home. He is in the process, he and his wife, of renovating the house because they'd been in it, I think, 30 or so years.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of activity inside going on at the time with the various workers. But it's got
And we like Marietta too. We
Yeah.
see her once in a while. She doesn't show up very often.
Yeah, I don't remember.
And I haven't
her.
seen Ed in a long time.
Yeah, I don't remember Marietta coming to meetings. Maybe
She
did.
She came to 2 or 3 of them.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's good. You know, wives like to see what husbands, or husbands like to see what wives or whatever are
Right.
up to, I guess, and
Right.
occasionally come to these meetings.
Yeah.
Some of them come quite regularly and
Mhm.
sort of get together as a group.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We have some we go out for dinner with quite often. So.
Well, getting back to
Tennessee.
Tennessee, now that was at that point had fairly recently become an autonomous library. It used to be part of the university library
Yes.
system. Were there holdovers of some of the
Oh yes.
old entanglements and so
Well-
on, and,
well,
and
there-
perhaps animosities even.
Well, there were animosities because the one who achieved autonomy was Barty Wolf.
I remember.
And Barty could tell people off. You know,
Yeah.
he'd get
But
a
even
dark-
he paid a bit of a price, because
He did.
it was tough on him.
Yeah, and
But
he,
it was
he did
sort
not
of his
stay.
mandate when he went there. They said the law school wanted that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
The ABA was certainly encouraging it in the accreditation rules in those days.
Right.
And I don't know if the sort of crusty old director was still there. I don't remember
The
his
dean of
name.
libraries left about 6 months after I got there.
Okay, he'd been there a long time, was the one I
Yeah.
remember.
But he was always charming to me. He didn't hassle me at all.
Yeah.
He'd already been through it. You know, it was done. It was a
Yeah.
done deal. So they hired a new dean, and she wanted it back.
Oh.
And we fought it tooth and nail, and she didn't take us back. And then they started seriously thinking about a building.
Mm-hmm.
We had about 3 more deans, and Dick Wirtz was the dean at that time. He was he's a great guy. I really like him.
Mm-hmm.
And he managed to get enough power together to get us a new building.
Mm-hmm.
And it was started to build in 96.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on the planning committee, and we wrote a document that asked for 150,000 square feet. We ended up with 108 net assignable square feet, and I think the library had about 90,000 of it.
That sounds pretty good. I mean,
It was.
comparing it to what we had, and we felt that it was quite
Yeah.
adequate.
We had a 5-story building,
Uh-huh.
and that was all new. There were classrooms in one part of the building, and the other building was renovated completely and made into offices. We disconnected from a building built in the 70s
Mm-hmm.
and used the original building from the 20s or 30s, renovated that, and my office no longer exists in the renovated building. The associate director's office is now the dean's office, and my office in the new building ended up bigger than the dean's office,
Mm-hmm.
and a little flack about it.
Yeah, that's
But not a
always
lot. Not a lot.
Tiny bit risky.
No, well, it just
depends on
happened.
who the dean is.
It just
and
happened.
the next dean and the one after that.
Yeah. So when it was all done, we had the dedication,
Mhm.
and the dean was there. He said, he said, you got a lot of space in that building.
Mhm.
I said, yes. And he said, well, I know why. He said, the librarians did their work, and the faculty fooled around. So they didn't get as much square footage. I sacrificed space after that, over the years, much to the chagrin of my staff,
Yeah.
my faculty and staff.
Well, that sort of thing is sort of reality, Bill.
Oh, yeah.
As programs develop and the walls they don't seem to build them expandable, so you have to make do with the space you have. And
Yeah.
the institution has to make do, and that means trade-offs sometimes.
And I didn't mind the trade-offs.
Yeah,
I thought it was the right thing to do. I've always been a team player,
yeah.
and I think that's what has
Well,
made
that's
me through.
that's our strategic role, I think. Is
Yeah.
We are a part of the broader institution. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe we don't like to behave that way sometimes, but sometimes we have to.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's interesting. My last associate director, Reba Best, she's good too. I love her.
Mhm.
She's great. She's thinking about retirement.
Mhm.
Now, before I told her I was coming to do this, and she said, "Now, Bill, she said, make sure you say anything you say is in good taste."
Uh-huh.
So I guess I have a reputation with her of not saying things in good taste. So
Well, you're talking to the wrong editor too.
I know.
don't censor anything.
I know.
I mean, I'll pull stuff out. If the phone rings in the middle of one of these, usually
Right.
the viewers will never hear that or see it. But
But
I'll move
I-
that out. But that's it.
That's why I've tried to be good.
Yeah.
So, but she worked hard on the building. Well, we all did, and we hired street movers to move the library
Mm-hmm.
from the old one. And they were street movers. They hired them off the street. This
How
company.
did that go as a result?
Oh, it was wonderful until Reba was supervising this one crew, and she got talking with him. He said, "Oh," he said, "I'm a parolee from Brushy Mountain Prison." He says, "I was in for murder."
Murder.
Yeah,
I was thinking
murder.
she might want to lock up her purse.
Yeah,
but maybe
right.
it's a little more serious.
But she ended up, getting along fine with him.
Yeah. Well, he
She could
probably
handle
was
it.
working just fine. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe he's trying to go straight.
But it's the funny things like that happen.
Yeah.
And we were going to have the grand opening on April 1st, 1994. Did I mix up those years? I bet I did. 1997.
1997.
97.
Okay.
And we decided April 1st, not a good idea. So we put it off till April 2nd.
Probably just as well. Yeah.
Just as well.
Yeah, you don't
So-
want to be the laughing stock of the campus.
But as I say, the dean said to me, the dedication, he said, "You've got way too much space there." He said, I said, "I know," but it was okay.
You know, I always sort of am amused. Actually, when I was a director, I wasn't always amused by this suggestion that somehow the library having something meant somebody else didn't have something
Yeah.
that they wanted. And, it's not like you and I as directors are out there using all the books, all the seats, all the computer terminals and hookups and so on. I mean, somebody else is benefiting, I think, besides ourselves.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
From all of this. And as I used to tell colleagues sometimes when they push me, I have something that you don't have, and that is this telephone the university's paying for, I can pick up, and I have colleagues all over the country. And if I need something, I can call one of them, and the way we work as a profession, they will move heaven and earth to help me out.
Right.
You don't have that contact. You rely on me and the library staff and the library for it, and that's why we have these resources. And it usually started to make them think a little differently about some of this. You
yes.
have it, so why?
Well, I had a dean came from Louisiana State.
Okay.
This is crazy. I can't think. It was Tom Galligan.
Mm-hmm.
He was a great guy. He's 10, 12 years younger than I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard stories about, when the director is older and you get a young dean, they may try to get rid of them.
Uh-huh.
So I was a little leery of it. Jane was too. But he ended up very nice, and I later found out that the business manager for the law school said to him, "You don't have to worry about Bill, he's a straight shooter."
Mm-hmm.
And so we worked out fine for 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, you talk about having a younger boss, which is sort of what the younger dean is to those of us in the other trenches in the place.
right.
Deaning is not an older person's field. I mean, these are faculty colleagues who may dean, but they're often in their 40s when they do it.
Yeah.
They still have they have the experience by then to know what they're doing. Some of them do know what they're doing, and yet they're young enough to still put up with all the hassles of also being a dean.
Yeah.
And then they go back on faculty and do their research and teaching and whatever.
Our present dean, he was coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point he said, "You're not a team player." We were talking about space. And I told him I resented it. I went to him and told him that. And he came back and apologized to me. He said,
Mm-hmm.
"You're not." And he's a great guy. I still am very friends with him. Very, very good friends with him. In fact, he helped me through retirement.
Well,
It was under my
at a
terms.
point in time, it's time. For some of us, it's time to go. I remember when I had been planning this. I had reasons, and I was sort of young for a faculty member to retire because many of the regular classroom teachers are still actually my contemporaries are still teaching this 11 years later. But their jobs are different than we have as heads of libraries and heads of programs in the school. And I went in and I talked to Claudio Grossman, who's still the dean of American, and his first question to me was, "What was wrong?" Well, there wasn't anything wrong. I was going, well, there wasn't anything wrong with any of us, and I had other reasons to do it. And he came to understand that, it wasn't that. And then he got a successor who's been there, 11 years and has done a lot of wonderful things too. So that's exactly the way it ought to be, I think.
So,
Well, Bill, you had some interesting years at Tennessee, after 6 in Oklahoma, but you've done other things too. You have been involved in the Southeastern chapter. In fact, back in the early 90s, or 2001, I forget what decade we're talking about now,
Yeah.
the chapter cited you with a special award in recognition of sustained special service to the chapter. Could you talk a little bit about some of the activities outside of your normal role that you participated in?
I have no idea why I got that. No, that's not so.
Oh, I think you probably had some reason for it.
Well, I was, I like to do projects. I like to do things on the computer. And there was a time when the ABA statistics, we would have our yearly questionnaires. We wouldn't get the information until late spring. Too late for budget planning or anything like that. So I started a statistics project. And that was a labor of love for at least 20 years. Everybody would send me their report. I'd have to wheel them, give me the report and I'll do it. And they would include salary data too, which ABA was not supposed to do.
Well, they did until the Justice Department pointed out to them rather abruptly that they ought not be doing that.
Right.
It was very handy to have, though, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. And we put out the same form, and they would fill it out and send it to me, and I'd do statistical analysis of it, means, averages, rankings, and it proved very helpful. And I did that for at least 20 years. And that was one thing I enjoyed doing that. And then I was one of the co-founders of COSEL.
And treasurer at some point.
Treasurer, yes. We had the first 3 years, we had 3 different treasurers. And I said, this is foolish. Make one person treasurer if you trust him. And so they decided they trusted me. It was nice. I enjoyed it. I didn't mind
maybe
doing
your
it.
minister put in a good word for you.
No. No, he was a good guy.
Yeah.
But the only thing I'm disappointed in COSEL, we did dissolve it. Because it's such a big chapter, Southeastern, and the schools are so spread out that we could never really get a project going that would work. So I finally decided that we need to do something about this, and suggested it's time to dissolve it, and we donated whatever money we had left, which was sizable. It was about $4,000 to the scholarship fund of SEAL.
Okay.
And I think that was the way to go.
Well, the SEAL chapter, we were in the District of Columbia. We were on the wrong side of the Potomac for a long time to be members of SEAL. I mean, Virginia could be in it. And we were envious of folks over at George Mason and on that side of the river. Because SEAL was doing so many things, we thought. We had a very active chapter in D.C. too, but SEAL would have been a little bit of an alternative. And then SEAL expanded their turf, and all my librarians became active in SEAL as well. And then I had to scramble to get the money to support these activities and travel. It was one thing, put us all on the metro and go downtown for a business meeting, and another thing to, fly down to Atlanta or Miami or wherever SEAL was meeting that year.
Yeah, like a cruise.
Or they did that one year.
The cruise,
yes. I played it down. I didn't explain to the dean about where the venue was, but
yeah, they had one meeting room. It was down in the disco of the ship. I don't think they ever used it. I shouldn't admit to that. So.
Well, ALL meetings in our early years were more social than in a different sense than they are today. And there were always educational programs, but there weren't as many or as competing with times and stuff. It was a more laid back kind of organization in that time, but it was much smaller too. I mean, it was 300 or 400 people would come to the annual meeting in my early years.
And the parties.
And the publishers would have parties afterwards, hospitality centers and the various suites.
And then they'd plan these special events. And I remember we were in LA, and they had a trip to a wine tasting and a trip to the tea house of the August Moon
Mhm.
for dinner,
Yeah.
which was nice. It was a great idea. In theory, it was wonderful, but it was a bus trip,
Oh, yeah.
and the wine was on the bus,
Mm-hmm.
and we were going up in the Hollywood Hills, moving the buses, or you know, some people didn't make it all the way up there. It was one of the disasters, but it was still fun.
Yeah. Well, one of the meetings we had in LA was out in Century City, too.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I remember the opening reception was on a movie lot
Yeah.
where you could recognize buildings if you watched enough movies or even TV shows of
Oh,
a
yeah.
certain type. And
That
there
was
they
fun.
were.
And that was the year that Lexus came out with the midnight breakfast,
Mm.
which was a great idea. It lasted for about 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
So, but it was fun.
Well, people wanted to maybe sleep in the next morning.
Yeah, I
so they got
know.
a head start on breakfast, but it doesn't actually happen. Because
No.
There is, even in those days, there was an awful lot to do, and,
Oh, yeah.
and you really needed to, be available to do it.
I have to talk about Carol Billings
Ah.
from Louisiana Supreme Court in LA.
Mhm.
Yeah, Louisiana.
Yeah. New Orleans.
New Orleans,
Yeah.
it's NOLA.
Yeah.
And I know you're doing an interview with her.
We're
tomorrow.
talking with her tomorrow.
Yeah,
actually.
so I told her that I was going to be oralized today, which
Uh-huh.
cracked her up. She didn't know how to interpret that. And I said, well, I'm going to talk about you. And she, oh no. But what I want to say about Carol, she was always, she still is, she's the friendliest person I know. And she can talk you into doing anything.
Uh-huh.
And she talked me into some embarrassing things. She made me stretch out. And I've been thankful to her for that.
Mhm.
She got me into a play in Reno
Mhm.
where I muffed my lines and forgot them completely. One line.
Uh-huh.
Turned around and somebody cued me. I turned back and said it. Of course, everybody cracked up. And we won the contest.
Uh-huh.
So, and then she had me repeat it at another meeting a few years later. And then she talked me into dressing up for the New Orleans style parade.
Uh-huh.
And Jane and I made a T-shirt that said, "What happens at double A stays at double A."
Mhm.
And I had this orange UT orange sport coat, and I flashed everybody,
Mhm.
you know, in this parade. You know, I thought, oh God, you know, I've never done things like this. She talked me into that.
Only in New Orleans.
Only in New Orleans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the meetings we had in New Orleans were, really experiences of their own. They were unique. I remember one closing banquet where they had fire, all sorts of stuff. I think the fire marshal would shut it down where I lived.
Yeah.
In New Orleans, it was very, a lot of show to it, a lot of fun.
But there's still that final banquet in Seattle in '73
Mm.
with the Texas disc jockey.
Oh, yes. Taking on one of our members.
Yes.
Yeah, that was an experience.
It was.
In human nature.
Yep.
Yeah, he pretended to be a television BBC guy
producer.
from England,
Yeah.
looking for talent to go over there at their expense and
Yes.
put their show on. Yeah, and
He got some volunteers.
that was the bait.
Yeah. But then after he talked for a while, he sounded legit.
Yeah.
And I said,
Boy, they had beautiful British
oh
accent.
yeah. He said, oh, let's cut the crap. What? It was hilarious.
Mhm.
And Dick Hutchins was at that meeting, and he didn't go to the final back. Didn't think of it.
Oh,
You know, I
that thing to
said-
miss.
You crazy! You should have come to it.
Yeah.
So
Well, in those days, you could register. I guess it was still you paid one registration.
Yeah.
The banquet was part of it
Yeah.
because we had a lot of corporate sponsors.
Yeah.
But later they set it up so you could pay less if you didn't do the
Right.
banquet. Now, of course, we don't have the banquet anymore. And,
Yeah.
that's probably progress, especially in this day and age.
Yeah.
But
but some
I
of those
miss it.
banquets were great.
yeah,
One in San Francisco
yeah.
with Tom Reynolds picking wines for every course. Whoa!
And, you know, the interesting thing is, Bill, as we walk around now, everyone is dressed in casual, you know, business casual or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
In those days, business attire was a lot more, shall we
Oh,
say,
yeah.
dressed up. And I remember at the banquet, women came in gowns that were gorgeous. And
Yes.
some of the men, I remember Earl Morgeson, always had a tuxedo.
Yeah.
And it just was sort of the norm. And, you know, I always wore my best suit
Yeah.
at the time,
Yeah.
but I didn't go beyond that really. Although for a while, when I was on the executive board the first time, we still had tuxedos, but then we relaxed those rules when I was on the second time.
The high mucky mucks.
Yeah, we figured we could dress as any way we wanted to, but we were on our own dime with what we were
Yeah,
dressing
that's
in,
right,
because
yeah.
the association had been picking up the tab on some of those tuxedo rentals. Yeah, so times
I
change.
remember Babe Russo.
Oh, she was a wonderful person. Our executive secretary before there was any other staff. She was it for headquarters.
She did so much.
Yeah, and was such a friend to everybody.
Oh yeah, she was. She knew you.
Yeah.
She knew you.
Well, let me tell you, out of school, and maybe I'll have to clip this out. No, I won't. I'll leave it in. When I was running for president, I had been nominated. You know, I'd been approached at the annual meeting, and would I say yes if they nominated me? And I said yes. But in those days, we weren't supposed to really know who would be up against us as a competition, and you know, I really didn't. And
Babe Russo came along and said, Pat, let's have sit down and have a beer together or whatever we were having. So we're sitting down there, and she leaned across the table in sort of this, you know, big conspiracy type look.
Yeah.
She said, do you want to know who you're running against? And of course I said, yes, I'm breaking the rules. Wonder I can't be impeached all these years later. And so she told me, and I imagine she met with the person who was running against me the same kind of way and said, you know, you're running against Pat Keogh. So, you know, there were no secrets.
Probably did it every year.
Yeah, probably did,
Yeah.
as a matter of fact. But she was a wonderful person. And,
But when she retired, I had to call headquarters for something, and they had no clue who I was. I was disappointed.
yeah.
Because I was so used to talking to Babe. So
Well, that's the only one you would have talked to.
That's right.
For a long time.
yeah,
And the progress was good. I mean, we needed to be able to empower more of the
Right.
members to do things, and that meant that somebody who was paid to do it had to take some of those burdens off members. And we certainly, the association is now so large and diverse, and these meetings are just huge. You know, the idea of all volunteers keeping it all organized is probably unrealistic today. Even though many of the old timers, including myself and probably yourself, we sort of think that it would be nice to still do some of that.
Yeah.
But we're probably fooling ourselves.
yeah, because we wouldn't do it anymore.
That's right. Other volunteers.
Other volunteers.
Or elder statespeople.
That's
now.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. And we deserve it.
Yeah. Well, you know, one thing we haven't talked about that I wanted to bring up or have you talk about was you've done some writing over the years, and I was particularly intrigued by a piece you did some years ago on clergy malpractice. Now,
Yes.
this is before it all seemed to hit the news
Right,
so much
right.
that there was more of that than we realized. Can you talk a little bit about some of that and maybe what got you sort of intrigued in that subject?
Contrary to popular belief, it was not because of our minister that married us, but I had been involved with churches for years. In fact, we are involved in the church now. We've been there for 19 years, and we haven't joined. And I told them, I don't want to get involved in the politics. So we did that in the past. We ran a youth group, we did all kinds of things. But then we were in Oklahoma City, and there was one guy, a minister there, and he would just wasn't right. And he would treat the older folks, and I'm very, very strong on this point. I love older folks.
Yeah.
I would
As we age, we become older
no,
folks.
even before that.
Yeah.
When I was probably 5 years old, my mother would take me to nursing homes, and I just had this empathy for older folks.
Mhm.
And it's been that way for years. And even though I'm getting up there, you know, but I think that's what. But there would be other things that I hear that ministers would do. Oh, like I had one minister once. He always wanted to know how much money I made, and I'd lie to him.
Yeah.
I didn't want to say it's none of your business, but it was just one of those things. And then things started to come out about it, and that's why I did that bibliography.
Mhm.
I thought there was a need for it.
Mhm.
So
Well, I mean, people of the cloth, I think, is one way of describing people in religious positions. And today it's not all men.
no,
You know, they're just like everybody else in some ways. They're all human. And,
yeah,
you know, it's a shame that,
yeah,
you know,
but it happens.
but sometimes people do things that are inappropriate.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We
So-
we have a church we don't belong. We there. We
You
do
said
have-
you've been there 19 years, but
19
you haven't
years.
joined officially.
Haven't joined.
Yeah.
And the minister that was there when we first got started, he would call me every time he was having people join.
Uh-huh.
And I'd say, no, Fritz, we're not going to join. One time he didn't call us. And so I went out to shake his hand at church. I said, Fritz, I said, this was the time I was going to say yes. And he wanted to smack me. I think he was so mad. So, but that's okay. But ministers are not immune from hassling.
Mhm.
I know that.
Yeah.
In fact, I bought 2 T-shirts, black T-shirts that say the Sermonator on the front. And Jay and I put their names of our 2 pastors on the back there and sent them to them anonymously.
Uh-huh.
I don't know what the reaction's going to be, but I'm looking forward to
Yeah.
it.
Well, in my own church, there was a group of us that had done something together, and at the end, one of the participants decided to give our pastor a sort of a little gift that was sort of more of a fun kind of gift
Yeah.
than a real one. Went out and bought one of those old-fashioned priest hats that you used to see back in the 40s. And he's got it now. He laughed about that. He actually wore it one time he was giving his homily, and he whipped this thing out as a prop. But ordinarily, they don't wear these anymore. Or
No.
not he doesn't. But
Well,
it's a lot of fun. Maybe on that note, I
Yeah,
should
that's
ask-
probably a good way to
I
stop.
should say we're sort of drawing towards the end of today's
Yes.
conversation, Bill. And, but is there anything that we haven't discussed that you would like to bring up?
As I said, I've never been a stellar librarian,
Mhm.
and I knew that. I did my job, I enjoyed it, I wanted my people to enjoy it.
Mhm.
And I have to say, I think most of my staffs have fond memories about when we worked together.
Mhm.
Yeah, we had problems, everybody does.
Mhm.
But everything was great. And I have good friends. I have friends from Miami days. One of them is still living, and she's close to 90. She was my Jewish stepmother,
Mhm.
and she taught me all about Jewish food and Jewish traditions, and it was really good.
Mhm.
And then there's some other folks that have really meant a lot to me. But I want people to be happy.
Mhm.
And yes, we need to keep up on our technology. I'm lost now.
Mhm.
I have problems with my own computer. In fact, it went belly up before we came here.
And you don't have those wizards up to the other part of the building you can call on to come down and save you.
I do have a techie,
Oh, do you?
but every time I have a techie come out, it costs me $500. So I decided I can't do
Yeah,
that.
there are some services that you pay for what you get.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
So now I'm in the market for a new computer again.
Mhm.
And I like computers, but sometimes they drive me crazy.
Well, you know, I just went through this with a laser printer. I had one for years, and I love it, and I was, used it for a lot of prints out. And it stopped working about 3 weeks ago, and I couldn't figure out, I finally had to replace it. And so I have a nice new version of it now, and, and a few $100 less in my wallet, too.
Right, yeah. I know my wife finally had to get a new computer, Jean. And she bought it at Costco. And I talked her into a 27-inch screen.
Oh, yeah, they're nice. I have one.
Yes, she said to me, I hate it she wants to trade with me,
Mhm.
so I may take her up on it.
Maybe on that behalf, I should thank you on my behalf and on behalf of Frank Odek, Dick Spinelli, and Michelle Wu, our colleagues with whom I am working on developing this oral history of law librarianship. And I thank you for being part of today and giving us insights and information and history that I think people will find interesting, and it contributes well to the oral history of our profession.
Yes. Well, I'm
Thank-
pleased that you asked me.
Thank you, Bill.
I know you needed comic relief, so that's what I've been telling people. But Dick has been a friend of mine. I have one last story about Dick.
All right.
He made a trip to Knoxville to visit me, take me out for lunch, and
Uh-huh.
I stood him up.
Oh,
And he's never forgiven me for that. I don't know whether you can use that or not, but
well, I don't either, but he's always been very generous,
Oh, yeah.
company, in terms of taking us out to lunch.
he has.
And he didn't quibble about who he'd take. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
invite whoever you want. And so the librarians
Yeah.
would go out and we'd have a nice discussion. And
Mhm.
we learned a lot of things about what was going on around, because
Yeah.
Dick was filling that role in addition
Yeah.
to representing the company and
Yeah.
helping us with their products.
Right.
Yeah, he was a special guy.
He's been a good friend.
Maybe on that note, I'll say thank you again,
Okay.
and we'll close off the
Thank you.
close off the conversation.
Okay, good.